Hello, my name is Kyle Bales, and I'm an independent journalist based in Davenport, Iowa. Now, normally I'm a writer, as I prefer to be writing articles about the cases and stories that I follow, but I do believe we need to start doing longer form presentations. Here, we're going to do this in the form of a podcast, I would say, where there are visuals to guide you along, but you also can just put your earbuds in and listen as we work through all the details and the information. Now, the case that I chose for this first podcast, you could call it, is the Coroner's Inquest into the death of Jackson Kradle. We've just crossed the 1 year mark since the verdict. Yes, it's already been more than 1 year since the inquest for an incident that occurred back in July of 2024. Now, we've extensively covered the inquest, from my coverage at KWQC to me interviewing in a 60-minute style format, two-part series, not on my watch, sitting down with the Carroll County Coroner, Matthew Jones. But we covered extensively all the headlines from the two-day inquest. There's a lot of nuggets that seem to be overlooked that help kind of fill in the picture as we approach a criminal and civil trial either this year or over the next couple of years. And so lots of information to unpack still to this day. So that's how we're going to start off with the podcast. A couple messages though before we get started is up above me. You're going to see scrolling local businesses, local business owners who support that real local journalism, have contributed to the work that I do, support the work that I do, but they get to promote their business as in the process, because in order to have true independent journalism, it must be supported from the ground up, and it must be supported from the public directly to maintain that independence. KyleJBales.com/donate, or really any place at the bottom of any article, you go to my website, you'll be able to find a way to donate if you would like. But if you have a business and would like to support what we do while also getting to promote your business separately, KyleJBales.com/support. You can message me, reach out to me. My information is available. You can email me at news@KyleJBales.com. Also, we'll go through a few of these sponsors and the messages they have. This seems fitting since we're going to talk about the inquest into the death of Jackson Kradle. There's a memorial foundation that the community has set up, and they are raising money for scholarships for local high school seniors. Euchre Tournament, which is one of these scholarship fundraisers, Saturday, February 7th at the Milledgeville Men's Club. We also have the dispensary out of Fulton. They've been serving Northwest Illinois since 2014, serving people with the medicinal needs and need that assistance with their medical card as well. They've been doing this for more than 10 years in the state of Illinois. If you need a criminal defense lawyer, the Mertz Law Firm is the one to call. Remember, criminal defense attorneys get a way bad rap than they should. They have to defend criminals, but at the same time, if you are charged with a crime that you did not commit, you want the Mertz Law Firm behind your back, one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the entire Quad Cities area. And if you have a wedding coming up that you're planning, you have a friend, relative, anyone you know that has a wedding coming up and they need the best entertainment in the area with the best service. I personally know Kelly, Lexi, and Anna. I've worked with them. They are the best in the Quad Cities. They serve all of Eastern Iowa and Northwestern Illinois. They will travel to serve you and your special event, corporate event, or your wedding. So let's get to it. This is 1 year later, the death of Jackson Kradle and the coroner's inquest to determine the manner of his death. We're going to go through the inquest, the available evidence, and at the end, we'll kind of touch on what's happened since the verdict. So let's get started. Let's pop there. Let's look at the witness list. day one, January 14th, we had 7 witnesses, and these are packed up front, the most key witnesses of this incident, or at least in those final hours before the incident and subsequently after. The first one starts off with the Carroll County Coroner, Matthew Jones. He really provides the opening statement of the inquest here. This is technically his testimony. He's technically witness number 1. He really summarizes, tells the jury everything they're about to hear over the next 2 days, touching on evidence and touching on what a lot of the witnesses were going to say. This is going to help save us time by covering the coroner's testimony, because he summarizes pretty much everything that we're going to cover going forward, except there's some key nuggets we get with most of the testimony going forward that tells a little bit more about the story, about what happened, why it happened. Number 2, Jackson Kradle's girlfriend at the time, Madeline Stevens. We're not going to dig into her testimony, but her testimony supplements other parts of that night that we will cover down the road. So we will touch on her testimony throughout this presentation. And then number 3 and 4, the 2 individuals who reported finding Jackson Kradle's body. Number 3 is Matt Herbstreit. He's the off-duty deputy, the now former Carroll County Sheriff's deputy, Matt Herbstreit. He's facing criminal charges right now in direct connection to the death of Jackson Kradle. His sidekick, witness number 4, that's Amy Hubble. She was an off-duty dispatcher with the Carroll County Sheriff's Office at the time, now former dispatcher, and an off-duty paramedic as well with the Savannah Ambulance Association. As far as we know, she still has her paramedic's license and still employed by the Savannah Ambulance Association. They have not told us whether or not if she's still employed there or not through official channels. Last time I checked, a few months ago, her paramedic's license was still active as well. Number 5, Kayla Russell. She's a key witness in all of this. Her testimony is vital for really to reach a verdict in this case. She provides key testimony because she was the last person with Matt and Amy before Jackson Kradle was struck by a vehicle. Then the next person who saw Matt and Amy would be witness number 6, Officer Scott Marth with the Mount Carroll Police Department. He's not new to the area. He's been a police officer in policing since the 90s, and he's been with Mount Carroll, I believe in his testimony, said about 6 years, so 6 or 7 years. He is not a stranger to the community. He's not a stranger to Carroll County as a citizen or officer. Number 7 is the next person to arrive at the scene, but did not see witness number 3 nor witness number 4. We're about to cover all of these details. First witness, Coroner Matthew Jones, born and raised in Savannah, Illinois. He opens up the inquest, giving us the basic details to start that we found. The person who died, the person that they're doing this inquest for, is 18-year-old Jackson Kradle. He had actually just recently turned 18 in July. In July 2024, he had just recently turned 18, and he actually just graduated from high school that spring. So first summer as a high school graduate, first summer as a legal adult, just recently turning 18. Where you see the yellow blob and the red X, that's the most accurate estimation on where Jackson's body was found, and this is based off of the inquest testimony from the coroner. In the coroner's report, where said he was found about 1/4 of a mile south of Loudon Road. Kind of looks like east of Loudon Road, but Illinois 78 is going southbound technically, so it's south 1/4 of a mile. That is measured out on Google Maps right there. You see Loudon Road on the left, and then Illinois 78, if you're going southbound, takes you right through the heart of Mount Carroll that you see there at the bottom of the screen. And the 2 individuals are on the left. You see there Matt Herbstreit, who was the off-duty deputy, and the off-duty dispatcher and paramedic was Amy Hubble, who is the passenger in his truck. So now we get to the call. So we go back to the fall of 24, where there was a rumor saying that they didn't call 911. They called their friends. So we requested, when I hear a tip, when I get a tip, when I get a lead or whatnot, I don't go to prove it immediately. Well, let me prove this first. No, I try to disprove it. So I just try to go find information that is going to disprove it, save me a lot of time. So I was like, okay, there was no 911 call? All right, well, we're going to request all the 911 calls. And then when we got the 911 calls back from that night, none of them said anything about finding a body. But then I listened to the archived dispatch audio, scanner traffic, and the dispatcher says, well, my caller states, I'm getting a call about this, about a body in the road. Who made the call? This call was initially released through my piece on KWQC with the help of Kyle Dickens, Will Ingalls, as well as Beth there. This is the call where we first hear Matt Herbstreit say he found a body in the road.
Carroll County Sheriff's Office.
Hey, Rebecca.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, so we just dropped Kayla off at home, and we were headed up 78, and there's a body laying in the road just north of Mount Carroll on 78.
What the fuck? What's the intersection?
It's just north. It's right before Loudon Road.
Before Loudon Road?
Yeah.
Like a deer?
No, it's a body.
Like a person?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you guys stop?
Well, we stopped to check on it, and I'm calling you, yes.
You're going to hear pauses, but that's because Rebecca Frederick, the dispatcher, she's dispatching. She's working.
Does Mount
she has
Carroll
a
have
mute
a car
button
on?
too.
Yeah, Marth's on.
All right.
She's dispatching
We'll
Marth.
wait for him to get there.
Is it breathing?
No.
And she's dispatching the deputy, Josie.
Are you there?
Yeah. You said it's by Loudon Road?
It's south of Loudon Road.
Again, she's working behind the scenes.
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah.
I'm
can you hear me?
dispatching Mark. Yes, I'm dispatching Mark to it.
Okay.
Is it male, female?
It's a male.
Well, her testimony
Is he
describes
cold?
this call.
Is it cold? No.
Are you guys going to do CPR?
That's Amy in the background you hear there.
Amy said he's got blood and brain matter coming out of his ear. Are you there?
Yes. I'm talking to Josie. They're both en route.
All right.
Does he have any ID on him or anything like that?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
All right.
All right, call me back if anything changes.
All right, so now we'll pop back into it. So that call was placed at 3:31 a.m. It lasted 2 minutes and got us to 3:33 a.m. We still have more about that call later on with some more testimony. So again, witness number one, Coroner Jones. He's gonna be speaking to the jury as witness number one. This is him kind of getting us started about that night. He says Jackson's father, Josh, reported to Coroner Jones that he last saw Jackson between midnight and 12:30, so about 3 hours before that phone call on Sunday, July 28th. And Jackson was reported leaving the family home in Mount Carroll wearing swim trunks only. At the scene, it was reported that the driver of the vehicle, Matt Herbstreit, called in the incident as a passerby. It was reported later that day by the Illinois State Police investigative team that driver Matt Herbstreit may have actually driven over the body. This is the first time through any official channel, let alone under oath in a courtroom, that we officially heard that Herbstreit may have actually been the one to strike and kill Kradle with his vehicle. He goes on, once this fact became known to Sheriff Clipping turned the investigation over to the Illinois State Police Investigative Unit. The lead investigator with Illinois State Police, Special Agent Matt Kipping. The process of transitioning this investigation seems to have gone well from the coroner's perspective, and multiple investigators, along with crime scene investigators that are working the case. It is agreed that the Illinois State Police will handle all media releases. That helps explain why the sheriff's office was quiet for the most part, except for responding to my request at the very beginning that someone said that there's someone that was found dead on the road. Can you confirm that, deny that? So he gave us the basic information, and then he directed us to go to ISP from there, which ISP said there was a person of interest. And then, of course, the FOIA requested that we file. It goes through the sheriff. And then, so really the only time he said anything directly to the media and the public was through that press release. But that was because I had the FOIA request results sitting in my email inbox. And then the next day, he released that press release. But he did email me in advance to say that that release was coming out. So it wasn't anything sneaky or anything like that. It was, the information was provided to us, the calls, the documents. He needed to, the sheriff needed to lead that narrative first, tell the public first that, hey, this information is going to come out. We're going to give you those details. That helps explain why we didn't hear much from the sheriff's office, is because all the parties agreed that ISP would be leading that. So we go on. Again, opening statements here. The vehicle driven by Matt Herbstreit was inspected by crime scene investigations technician Jeff Thu. A pickup truck. It was a pickup truck that was found to have fabric matching the color of Jackson's shorts, along with multiple instances of biological material hanging from or stuck to the undercarriage of the vehicle. This was bombshell information in the moment. I was there in the courtroom, taking away at my notepad with my pen, taking notes. Nowhere even close did anyone expect this in an inquest. But also, again, no one really knew what Illinois State Police had, or if their investigation had even been completed. Now we're being told that there's DNA on the bottom of Herbstreit's truck with fabric matching the swim trunks that Jackson was wearing. Those shorts and underwear are in the possession of Illinois State Police. And that tissue has undergone presumptive tests showing that it's possible human tissue. And since that time, ISP reported that the tissue has been positively identified as coming from the body of Jackson Kradle. The DNA matched Jackson. Jackson's DNA and fabric from his shorts that he was found in is in the undercarriage of Matt Herbstreit's truck, a deputy with the sheriff's office. It was reported that the vehicle in question, a pickup truck, had been washed at the Savannah car wash. Again, bombshell. The rumor about a car wash video had been going around for months. I even tried obtaining that probably back in September maybe, about the car wash video. I spoke to the owner who said it was put on a thumb drive, the video sent to lawyers. He'll have to track it down, and I never heard from him again. I had no idea Illinois State Police had already had the video. They're the ones who obtained it first, actually. And so they traveled, so that truck that they went to the car wash in that had the DNA on it traveled to the Quad Cities between the time of the incident and by the time Jeff Thew inspected it. The driver of the vehicle on this subsequent trip was reported to be Herbstreit's wife. Illinois State Police is in possession of the video evidence showing the vehicle at the car wash, and they played it too at the inquest too. Then he goes into the details of the autopsy, because this is a coroner's inquest to determine the manner of death. So we're going to talk about what the cause of death was. An autopsy with toxicology samples was performed between 1 to 2:15 the day after the incident in Rockford. The toxicology testing is requested to be expedited through NMS labs. That toxicology report was available for the inquest. The autopsy was performed by Dr. Mark Peters. Preliminary results of the autopsy support that all massive injury occurred in the same time frame of moments just prior to death. Basically what he's saying is it was one vehicle. So all of the massive injury, the fatal injury, the traumatic injuries occurred at the same time right before death. So meaning it was one vehicle that struck him, and that was the cause of Jackson's death. The injury occurred to the back and butt region, along with 2 points of injury on the skull opposite of each other. So fracture 1 is at the left base of the skull, and then fracture 2 is located approximately opposite of the skull near the upper right side of the skull. And bleeding was identified by Dr. Peters within the brain. There was also a puncture wound behind the right shoulder. And due to the nature of the injury, preliminary reporting by Dr. Peters, and the fact that agonal breathing was reported, it was actually from Amy Hubble, who was the first and only person to assess the body at the scene. She reported that she heard agonal breaths, which are defined as when you face a fatal injury and the body shutting down, dying, the body wants to take another breath. It still has air, and it's still wanting to breathe, even though the rest of it's shutting down. And so that's what they refer to agonal breaths. And he also explained, the coroner explained, that agonal breathing occurs within seconds or a few minutes after the fatal injury had occurred. So with that information, the coroner believes it is unlikely that another vehicle would have struck Jackson earlier, and unlikely that Jackson was beaten and placed in the highway. Because one vehicle, so the injuries occurred all at once. Agonal breathing happens within seconds or a few minutes. So if the person reporting finding the body reported hearing an agonal breath, there's not enough time for the injury to occur, them to arrive, and then to assess an agonal breathing. There's not enough time there. No vehicle would have come during that time frame because they were already there on scene at least within a few minutes of the injury occurring when Amy Hubble reports that she heard an agonal breath. And then the injuries happening all at once quashes a theory that Jackson was either severely beaten and then dropped off there in the middle of the road to make it appear like he got hit by a vehicle, or maybe by him being beat up and dropped off in the road that he would accidentally get ran over by a car or something like that. And so so there was something else that happened prior to being ran over by a vehicle. That was refuted based on this autopsy with Dr. Peters. And that's kind of that's leading the civil lawsuit, that's leading the criminal proceeding as well. And leads off the whole inquest. And then there's the toxicology report. And it shows that Jackson Kradle had a blood alcohol concentration level of 192, in the autopsy, mind you, that was taken the next day. So this probably would have been higher, already twice the legal limit as an 18-year-old. So Jackson Kradle would likely exhibit significant impairment, including poor judgment, reduced reaction time, impaired coordination, and slurred speech. There's also an increased risk of nausea, vomiting, potential blackouts, and the presence of delta-9 THC shows that he also had marijuana in his system, and the level of that means that it was recent use. What we'll see later, that Dr. Peters says that you can't really estimate time, but you can conceptualize that based on this amount of marijuana showing up in his system at that time, shows that, and then circumstantially, with the fact that we know he was drinking alcohol, a large quantity of alcohol, to have that level of intoxication, it most likely was happening together. And so, in summary, Jackson Kradle would be at a high risk of accident or injury while walking on the roadway due to significant impairment of motor skills, judgment, perception, reaction time, and physical stamina. His ability to navigate traffic safely would be greatly compromised, making him vulnerable to dangerous situations. And so alcohol levels really high for an 18-year-old. At this point, he's highly intoxicated. Then you throw in even a little bit of marijuana. That can create furthering effects of the alcohol. You can get the spins. The only reason why I know that is for the research. And so there's a lot going on there. His state of mind is not of a normal pedestrian. And that doesn't necessarily change the fact that someone struck him with the vehicle. It is going to play a mighty role in the defense. And we've already seen it. So in the criminal defense, it's going to be mighty. It's going to be a huge part of the defense. Jackson Kradle's state of mind and body here, and levels of intoxication. But the sheriff's office defense, like their first initial response to the lawsuit that they have to file a response to, they're already making the argument that the majority of the fault of the death, because it's a wrongful death lawsuit, they make the case that it was actually Jackson's fault by being intoxicated walking in the roadway at that time, because he couldn't have avoided an accident himself. Like, he couldn't have made the right decisions to avoid an accident, wouldn't be able to take actions to avoid an accident. So although the driver obviously is at fault in the sense of the ones that hit them, but that Jackson himself is the one that should be blamed the most for his own actions leading to his death. They even go as far to say that since he was living at his father's home, that the father's responsible as well. We'll get to that part later, and we'll hear some testimony from Jackson's father as well at the end of this. So now, Dr. Peters must not have been available this day because Dr. Peters doesn't testify, and I'm guessing that was planned, like that was already foreseen, knew that was going to happen. And so the coroner goes through a Q&A. So he sent Dr. Peters some questions, and I suppose his answers are considered testimony as the coroner reads off the Q&A to the jury. One of the questions is, are the injuries consistent with Jackson being in a face-down position at the time of impact? Dr. Peters said yes. The motor vehicle would have rolled over his feet first and head last. His body would have been parallel to the flow of traffic. So he was in the northbound lane. So traffic's heading north. He was hit with his feet first, then injuries to the head. So the car hit him from his feet toward his head because he was with the flow of traffic. So his head's facing north in the northbound lane. And we saw a photo, an aerial photo presented in the courtroom as well, which showed this. And then another question is, based on the injuries, does it appear Jackson was already on the ground when he was struck? Dr. Peters said yes. Could the pattern and nature of injuries rule out the possibility that he was standing or moving when impacted? Dr. Peters says there was no evidence of impact injury. If he was moving, he would have been crawling. So the coroner here, in his presentation, has ruled out that Jackson was upright, that he was walking, that he was fully upright. They've ruled that out based on the autopsy here. And then the toxicology helps support that as well. So the autopsy, the injuries, and the toxicology report kind of come together to draw this conclusion from the pathologist and thus the coroner, which is being presented to the jury here. That he wasn't standing, he wasn't walking, he was either face down onto the pavement, flat, face down on the pavement, or he was crawling, or he was hunched over. If he was stumbling in the middle of falling, we'll probably never know exactly what happened there. But the evidence, according to the pathologist and the coroner, is that he was not fully upright and he was not actively walking at the time he was struck for whatever reason. He could have tripped and fell too. So another question is, are any of the injuries consistent with Jackson committing suicide by placing himself in front of the vehicle? This is a critical question because we're trying to find the manner of death. So even if there's no evidence of a suicide, and that's bonkers, like that's ridiculous to even suggest that, you still got to rule it out as a manner of death. So you got to rule out suicide, then you got to rule out accident, rule out homicide. Like you got to rule things out to get to the final answer. Now we're going to go through a timeline. So like I said, the coroner really kind of summarizes all of the bombshell evidence and testimony, and then we just hear it from the witnesses themselves. And this is going to help us guide us, get us through the 300 plus pages a lot faster. So we'll go through the timeline that was presented here. This is July 27th, the day prior to the incident. From 5 to 7 p.m., Jackson Kradle is attending a party is attending the Cindy Sisler retirement party at the Copper Cow restaurant and bar, which is in Mount Carroll. Cindy Sisler is Jackson Kradle's aunt, right? This is what makes this such a unique case, but also just even more tragic. Cindy Sisler, I'm sorry Cindy if I get the years wrong, but I believe she's at the sheriff's office for 2+ decades. And so now she's retiring from that office. She's colleagues with Matt Herbstreit. She's colleagues with Amy Hubble. She's colleagues with the sheriff. She's worked for them for all of their careers. And it was her party they were all at. Because get this, from 5 to 8:30 that evening, Matt Herbstreit is attending Cindy's retirement party at the Copper Cow. Herbstreit is at the party of Jackson's aunt. And Jackson's in attendance. At 7 p.m., Jackson Kradle leaves the retirement party to join friends at a family cabin approximately 1 mile north of Mount Carroll. That's going to mean something here shortly for those that aren't familiar with the case. And so from 5 to 7 p.m., the evening before Jackson Kradle died, Matt Herbstreit and Jackson were at the same venue, the same restaurant, at the same party for 2 hours the evening prior to his death. At 8:30 that evening, Matt Herbstreit goes to Shaw's Grocery, and then to the after party at the Jason Sisler home, which I believe is not too far away from the original location. At 11:22, Amy Hubble calls Carroll County Sheriff's dispatcher, the on-duty one, Rebecca Frederick, to check where the cops are at. Well, why would a off-duty dispatcher call the on-duty dispatcher to learn where the cops are at. We've heard this call. We first heard it actually at the inquest. That was the first time anyone has actually heard the call. Then we were able to release it publicly when I was with KWQC. The full call is on the website, but we'll go ahead and we will take a listen to it right here.
Carroll County Sheriff's Office.
Becca,
What?
it's Amy Hubble.
Hi, Amy Hubble. What do you want? What are you guys doing? Oh, my God. Amy?
Oh my God, I'm so drunk and I'm headed to the Sandburg.
Amy.
Now listen.
Amy.
Listen.
Stop.
Listen carefully. You need to call me in the morning to make sure I get the fuck up.
Amy.
You have my... What?
Go home. Do not go to the Sandburg.
Oh, hell no, sister.
Are you with someone?
Well, Shay.
Oh, my God. He looks so drunk. He sounds terrible. He has a terrible singing voice.
He's a local police
He's
officer.
got drunk. Oh, my God. He is fucking amazing. Now, listen.
I'm listening.
No, you're not. Oh, where's the cops?
Where?
I shouldn't be driving.
I have an accident going on in Milledgeville. You have no cops around you.
Oh, good. I'm going down 52 and then 84.
Well, you might have to worry about hack bars.
Back bars. That fucking weasel dick.
Okay.
Have you been busy?
Yes, I need to get a tow. I have to let you go.
Now, seriously, you better start calling me at 4:45.
Okay, 4:45. I will start calling you.
You better, because otherwise you bitches are going to be there late.
If you do not answer my calls, I'm going to have hack bars do a buffer check on you.
Well, you know, just keep calling.
Okay, I have to let you go. I got to call a tow.
Well, I love you.
I love you too.
We will hear, again, we'll hear more from Rebecca Frederick's testimony later about that call as well. I believe the sheriff touches on it himself. Rebecca Frederick was actually fired because of this call. But she wasn't fired until November, a couple weeks after our story aired on KWQC. I'm not sure why that timing happened. I don't know if because we requested calls from the night that they went ahead and just listened to all the calls from that night just to prepare, and they came across it. I have no idea how that actually transpired, but we did get the termination letter for Rebecca, who's now, I don't know where she's at now, but she was hired by the Stevenson County Sheriff's Office as a dispatcher up there. But that phone call got her fired. And so now we move to 11:55, about a half hour after that phone call was made. At 11:55, Herb Street and the friend group are at the Sandburg Bar. And that's emphasized because we heard Amy Hubble in that phone call say she was heading to the Sandburg shortly before 11:30. So now they're coming together. At 12:30 now we're into July 28th, the morning of July 28th, Herb Street leaves the Sandburg Bar to drop his wife off at home and heads to the Sippyside Bar. He arrives at Sippyside around 12:43 to meet up with the same group. At 1:45, this is where fate begins its head-on collision course. At 1:45, the two timelines tragically start to aim right at each other here. At 1:45, Jackson Kradle and Madeline Stevens, who was his girlfriend, as we mentioned earlier, are driven by DUI. This is just a gentleman designated driver here. You can find his name in the inquest documents. He didn't testify at the inquest. He's not involved with anything. I just did not feel like we need to air out the identity of this person. dragging them into this, but the name is publicly available. I chose to refer to them by initials. And so this gentleman drove them from their gathering at the family cabin back into the town of Mount Carroll to their home with Joshua Sisler, who is Jackson's dad. That's who he was staying with that night. That's where Madeline was living at the time. And this is where we bring up, this is what Madeline's testimony was, is that they have this cabin out north of Mount Carroll, just mile north of Mount Carroll, about a half mile or so. I haven't measured it, but it's about a half mile from, maybe less. I think it might actually be less than that, of where Jackson was found and where this cabin is. But he was being driven home, so they come home. Madeline testifies, that they went to that cabin. They were drinking alcohol at that cabin, according to Madeline. And obviously we know from the autopsy results that lines up, the toxicology report with Jackson, that they were drinking there, but they all turned their keys in. That's the rule at the cabin there for that night, is that everyone turns in their keys and they're going to drink, but no one's driving. No one's driving for the night. And so something happened. There's an altercation. There's an argument there. For whatever reason, now they're going home. Jackson and Madeline are going home, but they can't drive. They won't give him his keys. They won't give Jackson his keys. So that's where that gentleman, DY, designated driver, comes and takes them and brings them home to Mount Carroll. And this is now shortly before 2 a.m. Now we really start getting to crunch time, these final moments here. At 2:13 a.m., Matt Herbstreit leaves the Sippy Side Bar, headed to Amy Hubbell's home in Savannah to pick up Amy and Kayla Russell, who is an off-duty dispatcher here that we mentioned earlier. And that's to take Kayla home, which is in Mount Carroll. Again, collision course here. At 2:21, Amy is at Casey's in Savannah to purchase cigarettes. That's not a significant detail, but it's a timestamp. They're in Savannah at 2:21, getting ready to head to Mount Carroll. At 2:30, an hour before Jackson's believed to have died, Jackson Kradle leaves home, walking back to the family cabin north of Mount Carroll. So we got two timelines here. We got Matt, Amy, and Kayla getting ready to leave Savannah shortly before 2:30. At around 2:30, that's when Jackson's now leaving his home in Mount Carroll and starting to walk. And Madeline testifies that Jackson was upset. We know from the toxicology report he's heavily intoxicated, so he's not thinking fully straight here. And for some reason, he just storms out. Rather he's mad at her, whether he's mad about the argument, the fight at the cabin, whether he's mad that he had to leave the party and come home, he didn't want to come home, or he's mad at that now his truck is stuck out there. You know what I mean? You just know when you drink or you smoke, you just know nothing really makes sense. And for some reason, the tragic flaw here, the tragedy here begins with he's never done it before. No one's testified that he's ever done anything like this before. He has no shoes on. He's barefoot, no shirt on. He's just wearing swim trunks. He decides to walk out the door, leave, and start heading back to the cabin on foot. And, Josh was home, Madeline's home. That's what they testified to. But if you think about it, it's like, well, why would you let him leave at that time? There's family members that live near them. I believe even one across the street. He's never gone out in the middle of the night and walked like this, in that condition. And if he really wanted to get somewhere irresponsibly, or if anything was happening, why would they let Jackson walk on foot? I mean, there's vehicles at the house. And I heard there was keys available as well. There's nothing in the realm of their imagination to think, truly believe that Jackson, if he walked out the door at 2:30 in the morning, that he's going to go out walking towards the cabin. That didn't cross anyone's mind according to their testimony. He's never done it before. Let's go back to the other side of the timeline now as we're getting closer and closer to the fateful moment. Testimony that we get that you'll hear later is at around 2:35. Matt Herbstreit's driving his truck with Amy and Kayla. They go to Matt's camper at 2:35, around 2:35, and they're there for approximately 10 minutes before they head up northeast towards Mount Carroll to drop Kayla off in Mount Carroll. They arrive around 3:05, and they're there for about 15 minutes. So that approximately puts them leaving Kayla's home at around 3:20. And they decide, instead of going south and west, they decide they're going to take the long way home to Savannah. For whatever reason, they're going to go north on 78. And I bet they wish they would have just taken the normal route. I have a hunch. And then obviously the call that we heard was placed at 3:31. So roughly 10 minutes. This is really quick happening too. So 3:20, about 10 minutes later, they're calling the dispatcher. They're calling Rebecca at the sheriff's office, which is in Mount Carroll, mind you. 10 minutes after leaving Kayla's, they're calling Rebecca saying they found a body in the road. So now at 3:34, dispatcher Rebecca Frederick contacts Carroll County Deputy Josie Anderson and Mount Carroll Officer Scott Marth, like we heard in the call. At 3:35, dispatcher Rebecca Frederick contacts the on-command staff, Carroll County Sheriff Ryan Clipping and Ryan Lambert. Ryan Lambert answers the call. Sheriff Clipping had the night off, the weekend off, I believe. I think he was vacationing. Ryan Lambert wasn't the acting sheriff, but he was the supervisor on call, you could say. 3:36, Mount Carroll Officer Scott Marth officially arrives at the scene and speaks to Matt and Amy. 3:40, Lambert calls Sheriff Clipping, and now Sheriff Clipping is informed about the incident. This is really important. This is really important here. This is gonna tell us a few things. So Martha arrives at 3:36, talks to Ben and Amy. 10 minutes after Martha arrives, just 10 minutes, Carroll County Deputy Josie Anderson arrives at the scene. She actually has jurisdiction because it's in the county jurisdiction. Matt and Amy are already gone. And so it's important that we see a couple things here. I typed in, I marked the location of Jackson's body, and then I typed in, take me to the Savannah car wash in Savannah. The first and only route that Google Maps told me to use is this one. You can see, you look closely in the far right, you're going to see Mount Carroll there. And it shows taking him from the body south in Mount Carroll over to Savannah. Well, when they dropped Kayla off of Mount Carroll, why'd they go north? That's a question we don't have an answer to. The prosecutors believe they were taking the long way, which meant their night wasn't over. So there was going to be more they were going to do that night. Kind of just illustrating what their mindset was at the time. 3:46. We don't know exactly which time Matt and Amy left the scene, but we do know at 3:36 they were there with Marth, and at 3:46 they were not there. The deputy arrived. So at minimum, if they left the minute before, right as Josie pulled up, they were pulling away. 3:46 is that time. At 4:03 is the timestamp. At the car wash where Matt Herbstreit, where police say it's him in his truck pulling into the car wash. They played the video. I mean, it definitely the truck. It looks like him getting out to spray the bottom half, the undercarriage of the truck. That's at 4:03. So if they left right as Josie arrived, that's 17 minutes. So I know some people think that he left and then dropped Amy off because they both live in Savannah, that he dropped Amy off, then went to the car wash. Type it into Google Maps, the trip. Unless they went north, that's the only explanation otherwise. We don't know for certain. Even when reviewing the transcripts, Marth doesn't remember which direction they went. He said he was looking at his computer. So he doesn't know if they went around the crime scene and went north or backed up and went around and turned back around to go south to go this direction. So it's possible they go north. That's a much longer way. But based on the timestamp at the car wash, not only did they go straight to the car wash afterwards, after leaving the scene, like their intent, they left the scene, they went to the car wash. This indicates Amy was with them, because if they left right as Josie arrived and they landed at the car wash at 4:03, that's 17 minutes. Google Maps says that's an 18-minute drive. They went straight to the car wash after Martha allowed them to leave the scene. So now this is the coroner going through the timeline some more. We'll run through this. Shortly before 6, Coroner Matthew Jones and Deputy Jacob Casey arrive on scene at 6:11. Sheriff talks with Matt Herbstreit at 6:41. Herbstreit goes to the Carroll County Sheriff's Office, write out a voluntary statement, leaves it in the sheriff's in Clipping's mailbox. That's the letter that got him the obstruction of justice. The special prosecutor says Herbstreit lied in that statement, saying that he went around the body and that he didn't actually hit the body. That's what he said in the letter, according to the prosecutors, and they consider that a lie. And so he's been charged with obstruction of justice for lying to the sheriff, because the sheriff was the lead investigating agency at the time. Until 11:25, Illinois State Police contacted to take over the investigation. We'll go through the testimony that talks about what led to that decision. At 1:20 that afternoon, Illinois State Police got to work right out the bat. 2 hours later, Illinois State Police have their first interview with Amy Hubble. And then simultaneously, at 1:44, but they run simultaneously, they're long interviews. At 1:44, they're having their first interview with Herbstreit that afternoon. And then that evening, 9/11, Illinois State Police crime scene investigator Jeff Thew tested biological material from the truck for human tissue. That night, ISP already had DNA off the truck and the fabric off the truck, Herbstreit's truck. Autopsy was performed the next afternoon. Then and then also that afternoon, Illinois State Police conducts their second interview with Matt and Amy. They played the audio of the interviews. It was just an interview. There was no video anyways, but they played the audio at the inquest. The first interview, they both the same. They went around the body, came back, looked. They tell the whole nine. Day 2, the second interview, Amy, same story. Went around the body. I don't know what you're talking about. And then Herbstreit, he doesn't confess. He doesn't admit to hitting Jackson. He comes up with this strange story. He's telling these investigators, I had a dream. No, he wasn't at in Washington, D.C. giving a speech. He he says he was having a dream where he's kind of reliving driving down 78 and coming around that corner. And he says he was driving in the dream, and then he saw Jackson's body, and so that's what made him believe the speed he was driving, driving and seeing. He goes, there's no way he could have missed him. That he may have hit the body, that it's possible that he wasn't able to get around him fast enough, and so he had to have. This is just a dream, mind you. It wasn't real life, according to Herbstreit telling the investigator. And then he kind of starts getting emotional and crying or whatnot. Never actually confesses or admits to anything. He just says, in a dream. He goes, well, based on the dream, I had to have maybe accidentally clipped him or something. Unfortunately, we don't have access to that audio. Illinois State Police won't release it. So just the people that heard it at the inquest are the only ones that know word for word what it was. It's hard to explain. They won't give us transcript of the interview either. So now witness number 2, Madeline Stevens. Again, we're not going to dive into her testimony, but her testimony has been already mentioned. She's the main witness for the only witness at this inquest. The trial will probably be more people. Will likely be more. It'll probably be people. Whoever was at the cabin will be subpoenaed probably, if not already. She just tells us at the inquest what they were doing that night, that evening. You know, they were drinking alcohol, not at public establishments, but they were drinking. Her and Jackson, and then they go to the cabin. They're drinking. I believe that's where she's talking about. There's vodka, a bunch of different drinks there, and then obviously going back home. What happened at the home before Jackson walked out and left? Why they didn't think anything of it? Because they just thought. I believe she asked Jackson left. They just thought that he went to a family member's house. He just walked across the street or over to a family member's house and he'll be fine. No one ever thought it was even be possible for him to even think about walking out back out to the cabin. Witness number 3, they call Herbstreit to the stand. He answers like basic details, like age, like basically that he exists. But then when they ask anything about that night, that morning, the scene, nothing. Even like innocent questions about like, what did it look like? What did you see when you were driving down the road? Like, what did it look like? What did you see as you were driving down the road? I mean, they're just a passerby, right? They're just a witness. So just tell us what you see. What did it look like? Was there enough lighting? Could you really see anything on the road? They pled the 5th. He pled the 5th. Well, Joe Knack, his attorney, pled the 5th, essentially. Witness number 4, same thing. Amy Hubble answers basic details, but when it comes to anything about the night, or Illinois Route 78, pled the 5th. When it comes to the civil lawsuit, Herbstreit has a stay. His lawsuit against him that's pending for a civil case is stayed, delayed, stopped, kind of paused until his criminal proceedings done. Amy Hubble had a formal response. She doesn't have that excuse, a criminal proceeding. She hasn't been charged with anything. So she responded to the civil lawsuit, the wrongful death lawsuit, and she pled the 5th. And then witness number 5, now we're going to jump back into it. So now we got some critical details and facts. Our testimony from Kayla Russell, the last person to be with them. She's the off-duty deputy, or dispatcher. So she says she's the back passenger in the truck. So Matt goes and picks up Amy and Kayla. Amy gets in the passenger seat. Kayla gets into the back seat. And they're all 3 in the truck, and they're going to Matt's. They're going to go, at least to his camper, not his home, but he's going to go to his camper, which is like, what, 3rd Mile Road, something like that. I don't know the exact name of the road, but it's just to the southwest of Mount Carroll. We showed it on the map. So they asked Kayla, do you know the purpose of that visit? Like, why were they going to the camper? And Kayla says, I don't know the purpose. Once we got there, Matt and Amy got out of the vehicle. I stayed in the vehicle. We were there maybe 10 minutes. I'm not sure what they did while they were out of the vehicle, but I stayed in the vehicle the entire time. So they get picked up. They go to Matt's camper. Matt and Amy get out of the car, go inside, do whatever. We don't know. We might not ever know. And then they come back. So they're only there for 10 minutes. Now we're gonna head into Mount Carroll. And so now they're asking her about what were they doing? What are they doing? Were they drinking? Kayla says, I just know that Matt and Amy both had a drink on our way to Mount Carroll. And we know that this is happening within an hour of them reporting Jackson Kradle's body, or at least reporting a body in the roadway. That's the trip they're talking about here, heading towards Mount Carroll. This was like 2:35, 2:45 at this point. So we're within the hour of them making the call. Kayla says, I don't know if they got it from the camper or if it came from Sippy side. I'm not sure. So they ask her again. So they were drinking inside the vehicle? And Kayla says, correct. And so then they ask her, and so is there any indication of where you would put him in that scale of 1 to 10, on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of his level of intoxication? Kayla, and this is another bombshell witness testimony here, because again, it was just a rumor. Well, they were just drinking. They were at the bars all night. What do you think they were doing at 3:30? Very circumstantial, speculative hearsay. Kayla, under oath, says, I've seen him more drunk than he was that night in the past, but I would say a 7. A 7 out of 10 for level of intoxication within an hour of making the call about finding the body. Now for Amy, for her, now Amy wasn't driving at this time. She was driving 3 to 4 hours prior based on that phone call she made to Rebecca. But she's the one that is acting like a paramedic at the scene and assessing Jackson's body and relaying information about his condition, saying he's dead and that EMS is not needed. Well, Kayla says, within an hour of that happening, on a scale of 1 to 10 for intoxication, Kayla says for Amy, probably the same as Matt, a 7 or an 8. And so they asked her, so Matt and Amy were similar in their intoxication? Kayla says, I would say yes. Now we're talking about working with Herb Street, like what he was like to work with, and trying to rationalize why a law enforcement officer, even though he's off duty, would just report finding a body randomly in the road with traumatic injuries and then just hightailing it out of there. So they asked Kayla, has Matt ever stayed over past his shift? Kayla said yes, many times. Okay, had you ever witnessed if something was happening in the field, on the road, an accident of some type, that he would stay beyond his shift to assist anyone? Kayla said yes, he would. And so I put these times again down here to really show, okay, so he's known, and we'll hear it from other witnesses too, other colleagues under oath. He's known to stay past his, stay on the job, helping people even when he's off the clock, beyond his shift. He's working extra hours to help. He stays on scene, helping others. Yeah, he's off duty. Anytime he's off duty, he doesn't have to do anything, but he's known for working off the clock. So then why at 3:31 is he reporting finding a body 15 minutes later at 3:46, he's gone. And at 4:03, he's washing the bottom of his truck. And then I put the fourth time there, Jackson's body doesn't even arrive to the morgue until 7 o'clock. So Matt Herbstreit, who's known to stay beyond his shift to help at scenes, right now he's at a scene where there's a man with traumatic injuries, apparently dead, in the middle of the road at 3:30 in the morning. 32 minutes later, he's at a car wash as a active law enforcement officer, washing the bottom of his truck after being at a crime scene. 32, Jackson doesn't arrive to the morgue until 3 hours after Herbstreit is at the car wash. And the next one is Mount Carroll police officer Scott Marth. He is no stranger to the area, like we said. You know, he's been with Mount Carroll for several years. He's been an officer as long as I have been alive, actually. And so we are going to go to his testimony because his testimony is important. He's the first law enforcement officer on the scene. He's the first. So Kayla's the last person with Matt and Amy prior to the incident. Officer Marth is the first person with Matt and Amy after the incident had occurred. So they asked Marth, who's on the stand, was this your accident scene? He goes, no, it was not. Which jurisdiction had authority for that accident scene? Marth said it would be the sheriff's department. Then they asked, okay, so if it's not your accident scene, did you think you had authority to dismiss Matt and Amy from the scene? And then Marth says something, he goes, when he asked me the question, I just didn't really process it. And if you're confused by what that means, so was the coroner, because he responded with, I'm sorry, you what? And then Marth says, I didn't process jurisdiction. I said no, I didn't need him there. Because he said that Herbstreit asked him, hey, do you still need me? And Marth testifies that he didn't process the fact that it's not his scene, actually. It's not actually a scene. He just unilaterally decided, yeah, you're good to go, before the county deputy even got there. Now, did you not suspect they might have been the ones that hit the body? And Marth says, at that time, no. I had no indication they were involved. And then they had this exchange where, well, knowing the facts that you know today, like knowing what you know now, and this was at the inquest, mind you, this is a year ago, before everything else, even from this inquest was even known, before the verdict even came in, knowing what you know now, like knowing that Matt and Amy are being investigated, they asked Marth, what would you have done differently, knowing that Matt and Amy are being investigated for it and that, you know, there's DNA on his truck? Marth says, I would have just asked them to stick around until the responding deputy got there. So for a while there was questions about, you know, Marth, why would Marth release from the scene? He can't do that. He doesn't have jurisdiction or whatnot. And if it was like, you know, justify that, hey, he's an officer, he can release people from the scene. Marth himself said he shouldn't have let them leave the scene. Then they asked him, was there anything about their behavior that led you to believe that they could be intoxicated other than just in shock? Marth says, I did not notice any impairment. He didn't notice any impairment. In his incident reports, he wrote they acted normal and professional. Witness number 7 is now the deputy that arrives. Now she does have jurisdiction. So she pulls up, you know, she's taking the stand. As she pulls up to the scene, they're discussing. they ask her, what was your initial reaction to the answer that Scott Marth gave you about why they left the scene? She asked the initial reaction as to why they were released. Yeah. Her response is, I kind of, at the moment, kind of just said, okay, and just kept going with it because, I mean, we had command staff, we had crime scene, we had people we had to get to the scene. So they asked Josie, did you think that was normal? She says, typically on a scene like that, no. Just because if it's in our jurisdiction, quote, that would have been my call to make on who gets released and gets to go. So Josie says that was supposed to be her call on if they should be released from the scene or not. Now, in regards to EMS, okay, well, Marth never dispatched. Amy never said anything to dispatch. Rebecca won't dispatch. ISP's asking about why EMS isn't dispatching. They don't dispatch. Well, let's ask the deputy on scene. It's her accident scene. What does she think? She says it was obvious at that point EMS was not needed. She goes on to say, with my training as a law enforcement officer through lead homicide investigation, stuff like that, more personnel on scene, all it does is essentially add to a scene, and they kind of alter the scene. She says it, so at that point, it was very obvious that EMS was not needed. So we did not contact the EMS because that's just more people on the scene to mess up any kind of evidence, to alter any part of the scene. So that's actually, we find out that, you know, the deputy with jurisdiction also kind of made a furtherance of that call. So Amy at that point, who was allegedly intoxicated, Amy assessment was doubled down by the deputy that showed up, kind of corroborating what Amy observed at the scene, even if she was allegedly intoxicated or not. Then they ask her about, when you were pulling up to the scene, did you think you were going to see Matt and Amy? And she goes, yes, I was expecting him, Matt, to be there when I got there. And they ask her, so that would have been a surprise not to see him when you arrived? And she goes, it was probably the first question I asked Marth is, where's Matt and Amy? And then Marth said, I released them. And then she said that Marth explained to him, saying they were walking around the scene. I didn't want them stepping in or moving or altering anything. We know where to find them. And that's why I released them from the scene. So since they know them, then they know Matt and Amy, we'll just get a hold of them later so they're not walking around, could possibly step into evidence. That's the explanation. Day one in the books. And again, a lot of this information here seems like common knowledge. There are a few nuggets, I think, that help paint the picture even further covering it now, a year later. But, I mean, if this feels like common knowledge to you now, I mean, again, I remind you to put yourself back in those shoes, waking up that morning, going to the courthouse on the 14th. This shook. This was sent shockwaves through that community. Instead of hearsay, innuendo, speculation, rumor, this was sworn testimony. DNA, fabric, video, interviews, car wash video. This was an incredible, started around 10 in the morning, 6 o'clock adjourns, 8-hour day. And typically, if you're sitting 8 hours in a courtroom, you're probably dozing off. Wide eyes. Wide eyes in that courtroom. Even the jury perked up. It was an incredible experience to be there. Now we go to day 2. They give everyone the day off Wednesday, and then we come back Thursday January 16th, for the second day of the inquest. And again, remember, inquests, for the most part, are like 20, 30 minutes and uneventful. We're going to day 2 after all of that no one was expecting. So the main witnesses, the most important witnesses, were that first day, like the ones that were directly involved in kind of Matt, Amy, and Jackson. Here is a little bit more of the peripheral. People kind of like secondary to the incidents. Except, obviously, we see Rebecca Frederick on there, though. So the first one, so these are important people in the story. They just don't have the same kind of gravity to their testimony as these do. Those people made a direct impact on the incident, one way or the other, different degrees. So witness number 1 on day 2 is the crime scene investigations technician Jeff Thu. So if you don't know how these investigations, death investigations work, homicide investigation, anything, the detectives, Sherlock, is not processing the scene. Detectives, officers secure the scene so that people don't come in and touch the evidence. Detectives ask questions about the evidence, what people think, what people did. Technicians are the ones that actually process a crime scene. Totally separate, totally different field, totally different training, totally different schooling here. And you hear this a lot, like, 8 hours after it happened, they brought the fire department and they cleared off the road. What if they need that evidence? What if there's evidence there? No, that's what technicians are for. You hear the same thing even in Orem, Utah, with the assassination scene. Well, they paved over the scene 2 days later. It's a crime scene. It's not a crime scene. Once a CSI technician processes it, it's done. They take so many notes, they collect so much evidence, every little tiny bit. You see them put the little tents down, the little yellow tents, the little evidence markers and stuff, every shell, every casing, every little bit and gravel, every body, material, anything that they think may or may not be relevant to the death or the case. Those technicians take so many photos of everything, collect, preserve, store, all the way up to the body itself, and ensuring that it gets to the morgue and tracking everything that happens, from putting it in the bag to loading it up to transporting it to securing it with the coroner, the coroner's office, funeral home, whatnot. You could build a 3D model off the information that they take and they get. That once they're done, the scene is cleared. You don't need the scene. You don't need the physical scene anymore. A good crime scene technician can recreate the whole incident to a T. Witness number 2, Rebecca Frederick. She's the dispatcher. We're going to go through her testimony. There's some very interesting details that we learned from her. Witness number 3, we hear a little bit from David Mercado. He's the detective for the county, the lead detective for the county, and so was the lead detective technically for about 6 to 8 hours that morning before they handed it to ISP. Witness 4, we will hear a little bit from the sheriff, and we will hear a bit from Jackson's dad, just because he's named as part of in the civil case. And since because it was his house that Jackson was last at, we won't go through the testimony of Jackson's mother, Diana. It's essentially, it'll make sense once we get to the testimony from Josh, the type of questions they asked them. Important questions that had to be asked, the tough questions that have to be asked. But it's the same answers. And God bless Diana, she wasn't there in those final hours. And so these other individuals had a direct, connection, whether it was in those final hours or those immediate few hours after, or they're in law enforcement or a witness to what happened. Diana was not with Jackson in those final hours, did not see Jackson, as she does not live at Josh's house. They don't live in the same house. So she testifies last, but we're not going to go into that testimony. Witness number 1, CSI Jeff Thu. So there's going to be, things are going to get a little wonky here about what everyone's mindset was that were investigating the death that morning. And, there's been, the past year and a half has been a lot of question with the sheriff's office, what they knew, when they knew, and how it affected their decisions that morning. Well, this is Illinois State Police. Jeff Thu's with Illinois State Police. He shows up, really before most of them and processes the scene. And he's speaking to the coroner here on the stand under oath. So when he says, upon leaving your facility, they're talking about the morgue. So Jeff, helped, load the body into the bag, load it up into the transport vehicle, takes it to Savannah. Like we saw, it was about a 15-20 minute drive. They go there. Now he's talking about leaving that facility. So he's already processed the scene. He's already helped remove and transport the body to the morgue, remove the body from the crime scene and transport it to the morgue. Now he's getting ready to leave the morgue. Thu testified, the Illinois State Police crime scene investigations technician says it was a complete unknown in terms of who do we have and what possibly happened. That's Illinois State Police crime scene investigations technician saying this. Complete unknown unto whom, as to who this was. So they didn't have the identity of the body. They didn't even have any idea what happened. And this is the guy that processed the crime scene. And this was about between 7, 8 in the morning. Nearly, 4+ hours after Jackson was reportedly found. Leaving there, left the morgue around 6:55. They let the jurors ask questions as well, so they'd question the witness and then they'd open up the jury to ask questions themselves. One of the jurors, kind of like off topic here from what they were discussing, but when they got to the Q&A, one of the jurors asked about body dashboard cameras, because they're like, okay, Marth talked to Matt and Amy and released them. Well, let's see what they say. Let's see a recording of that. There is no dash cam footage from Scott Marth, from the coroner. Josie, now we're talking about the deputy who first arrived. Josie had hers working. And when she arrives on scene, she does speak to Officer Marth right when she pulls up, but it's not on video because she had not hit the proper button to activate her dash cam or her body cam. Whether it was the wrong button, just hadn't pressed it yet, just kind of pulled up, saw Marth, was like, hey, I didn't think to click anything yet. Probably still kind of shocked because she's probably like, where's Matt and Amy? And then Marth comes up, where's Matt and Amy? And then you respond. It'd be nice to have that conversation in a recording. Doesn't exist. But of course, then she gets out of the vehicle and she's there on scene. And she does hit the button, then it's recording. And the coroner says he's seen that video. And he said he didn't see anything of value in that video. I've requested it. You can't really request body cam footage in the state of Illinois. Only people directly involved, like suspects, victims, their families, attorneys. They're really the next of kin. They're really the only one. They're the only ones that can request that. It's really up to the department. They're not legally required to give it, at least. And so I requested it and was denied it from the sheriff's office. But there's nothing odd. It's like protocol to deny that. I appealed it with the Attorney General's office. They sided with me, but it's still in the review. It's still in the review stage. But Coroner Jones says there was nothing of value in there, and that he did review it. There's no body or dash cam from Marth. Witness number 2. This is where things get interesting again. Witness number 2 is the dispatcher. And this is going to get progressively worse as we get through her testimony. Just the information just tumbles of the tragedy of this night. She goes, she started her shift at 5:30 the evening prior, the Saturday evening. And then the second dispatcher I was with left at 3 a.m. The call from Aunt Amy came in at 3:31. It gets worse. And so you were on your own from 3 a.m.? Correct. This is where it gets bad. And how long have you worked at the Carroll County Sheriff's Office? They hired me part-time in April. And then full-time at the beginning of June. This was July that she's on her own. It gets worse. So tell us, what were you thinking behind the scenes? What was going through your mind behind the scenes as these Matt and Amy were reporting, as this was unfolding? The dispatcher, under oath here, says, I thought it was a prank. They ask her, you thought it was a prank? She says, correct, yes. They ask her, well, what would lead you to believe that it could be a prank? She goes, just people have called in prank phone calls before. I mean, they knew I was nervous. I don't know why I don't have this highlighted. And that they knew it was my first night by myself. This woman is on her own as a dispatcher for the first time ever. And 31 minutes in, she's getting a call from a colleague and essentially her supervisor, Amy, saying they found a body. And they're asking, okay, so what did you think about his voice? What was going through your mind when he was talking to you? And she said, on the stand, she's like, his voice in my head seemed more nonchalant than I would have expected somebody to sound like when they come across a body in the road. So his voice did not sound like he had just come across a body in your mind? No. And you were expecting there's something else here? And she goes, I was expecting more detailed information if he had actually come across a body. That's why she thinks it's a prank. She's like, I know Matt. He's not gonna call on a body and sound this nonchalant. Because we heard the phone call. And she goes, I think he would have given me more information about how he came across the body, how it was positioned in the roadway, give me details like that, just more details of the scene. Then they ask her, how did you feel when you weren't getting that information? Rebecca testified, just confused. And then they go on about the EMS, which this is interesting because, there's a lot of belief, even me personally, that the morning was carried by Amy Hubbell's assessment. But if she was allegedly intoxicated, how could we have based the entire morning and wait 3 hours, leaving Jackson in the road, when we have an allegedly intoxicated off-duty paramedic who hadn't slept? It's 3:30 in the morning. They've been up all night. They asked Rebecca, the dispatcher, under oath, who did you finally take direction from about notifying or not notifying EMS? This is interesting here. Rebecca testified, when Josie said no, I left it at that. When Josie, the deputy, said no, I left it at that. So it wasn't just Amy that they based the assessment off of. Because like we said, Josie testified that it was obvious. Okay, so why would she want to know where the police were? So this was about that phone call at 11:22 the evening prior. Why would she want to know where the police were? Did you have any idea? Rebecca testified, I'm assuming it's because she was drinking and driving. But on this night, did you consider her to be intoxicated when she called you at 11:22 the evening before? And Rebecca said, I assume so. I mean, I knew. I wouldn't say I thought she was, blackout, unsafely intoxicated, but I knew that she had been drinking. And they go, okay, did you work with Amy often? Again, this is where it continues to get worse. So did you work with Amy often? Yes. But she says, I would say the majority of the time, since I was hired in full-time in June, I was mainly with Amy. So imagine what Rebecca's thinking when she's getting these calls from Amy. Like, this is our boss, our manager. They ask her, so she was in charge of your training much of the time that you were working with her? Rebecca says, yeah, I would say. And they ask her, so you were her subordinate? Correct. And then speaking about, words and what they sounded like, a juror asked Rebecca, did Matt's voice sound impaired or slurred words or anything when he called? Rebecca said no. Strange, but didn't sound impaired. Witness number 3 is Mercado. He is the lead detective on this investigation in the first 6 to 8 hours with the Carroll County Sheriff's Office. And so now he's being told that morning, he finds out what's going on, and he learned Matt and Amy's the one that called it in, but they're not there anymore, but they left. And so they asked him, David Mercado's now at the stand, Detective Mercado. They asked him, and was it strange to you that they were not still at the scene? Mercado says, at that time I didn't really think about it, because to me, I was going to get to him later on. So it really didn't strike me as odd or anything. They asked Mercado, so you knew you could talk to him later? And he said yes. Then later on, they asked him, okay, so it wasn't odd necessarily that he was released from the scene, but the fact that he's reporting something at 3:40 in the morning, is that a red flag for you? The timing of him being out there? Detective Mercado says, yeah, I wasn't comfortable with that. So not necessarily odd that he wasn't still at the scene after reporting the body, being off duty and all. But Detective Mercado with the Sheriff's Office says that he wasn't comfortable with the fact that he's reporting anything at 3:40 in the morning. He goes, unless he would have been working, that would make sense. He's reporting something, but why is he reporting something? Why is he up at 3:40 in the morning reporting a body in the road? Like, that just doesn't sound right. The Sunday morning isn't starting off right. and they can already kind of sense that. But Mercado says he didn't think much of it. Furthermore, this is where things get confusing, because the coroner says they didn't know what happened, who it was at the scene. There was no consensus about what could have possibly happened. There were just too many possibilities based on what was presented. We heard Jeff Thew say the same thing, that they didn't know as they were going to the morgue, leaving the morgue. They still didn't know who it was and what could have possibly happened. Mercado, apparently, no one else knew, but Mercado had a hunch, had an idea, based on his testimony here that we're about to go through. So they asked Detective Mercado, did you have any hypothesis about what had taken place at that point? Mercado says, well, I knew that a vehicle was involved. They asked him, what led you to believe that a vehicle was involved? And Mercado talks about his experience. He's been more than 2 decades with law enforcement experience, even outside this area. I believe it was Waukegan. He spent nearly 2 decades with, different homicide investigation, detective, policing work. He says, those scenes, I have seen them before. So then they asked Detective Mercado, were you putting 2 and 2 together yet to get that Herbstreit was involved yet? And Mercado said, not at that point. At that point, I want to identify the young man, find out how he ended up there, and work my way back, and just go where the evidence takes me. That's Mercado under oath. Furthermore, he told them, so now they're talking about, they investigate, there's an accident like in the area, they go investigate that, they question that person, they're kind of chasing people down that Officer Marr thought he recognized the person who was on the road as a former student or a student. He's a school resource officer at a time or whatnot, working at the school. He thought he knew who it was. So they're chasing that person down, trying to identify them. And then eventually they get kind of like a conference, like, with the coroner, the detective, sheriff, whatnot, troopers. And so this is Mercado speaking about that conference with the sheriff. He goes, I told him, you know what? This is a conflict of interest now. I told him what I was going to do, which is interview our employees. They asked him, so it was your opinion in those moments that Matt Herbstreit, the person reporting the body, was the driver of the vehicle that was involved with Jackson Kradle at that scene? Mercado says, well, I considered that a possibility, and because of that, if I were to interview him, I'd have to put some kind of pressure on him and also look at his truck. So Mercado told the sheriff that it's time to let the state police handle this. Furthermore, he goes, and as a matter of fact, when I was briefing the state troopers, I told them that whoever you send to an interview with Herbstreit needs to check under the truck. And so a member of the jury, asked an interesting question. They asked, were there any brake marks, skid marks, any indication of that? And the pavement was wet. The coroner said, it was actually a great question from the jury, that actually ends up appearing in the criminal complaint as well. Coroner Jones said, in my experience in this case, there have been no tire marks at all on the roadway. There were tire marks that showed up later on in that general vicinity on the road, but they were, that's unrelated. And then, so the coroner responds to the member of the jury, asking about the tire marks. The Coroner Jones says there's no tire marks at all on the roadway. And then the witness here, still being Mercado, he also answers and says there were none. Then he goes on to say, I'm pretty sure that young man was run over by a vehicle. Could have been twice, and whatever vehicle ran that man over, definitely is going to have some evidence underneath. And that's why I told the state troopers. So they asked him, so you passed the information to ISP? And he said yes. So that was David Mercado. Interesting testimony. He's suggesting that, he had the hunch, kind of what helped drive them calling state police. That's David Mercado's interpretation of that morning. And so the next witness is Sheriff Clipping. We're not going to go too deep into his testimony. It wasn't really long testimony. It was kind of just some basic stuff, mainly about discussing kind of the actions of his employees since he's the sheriff. He's the boss of everyone. And so now they start off with Rebecca. So they're talking about Rebecca and her phone call with Amy that evening prior. And then also, why would you leave someone alone that's only been there for a couple months? They ask him, is that something that the trainers were comfortable with and ready to go with? Is this a normal progression for her? And the sheriff said, Rebecca was one that was catching on quick. Saying, but her supervisor must have felt that she was ready to work on her own if she was scheduled to work on her own. And then they asked the sheriffs, the supervisor must have been comfortable. Matt must have been comfortable. Matt McGill, the 911 director, must have been comfortable with her doing that. And the sheriff said, correct. Then they asked him about, Herb Street now. And they asked him, what did that mean when you heard Matt Herbstreit and Amy were the ones that reported finding the body? The sheriff responds with, it's not a good feeling because you don't know what's going on. But they were the ones that found the body. And that's all I knew at that point. That's what the sheriff said. And about that party, it was a retirement party of a dispatcher, longtime dispatcher at the county. He said, I didn't know who was at the party, but I assumed those two would have been. Speaking about Matt and Amy. Then they asked the sheriff, and did you have any idea of their travel throughout the evening of the 27th or the early morning hours of the 28th? The sheriff said, I had no idea. He had no idea what Matt and Amy were up to, their travel at least, through the evening into the early morning hours up to reporting finding the body. He knew that they should have been at the party the evening prior, early evening prior. But what they did the rest of the night into the morning, he had no idea. That's what the sheriff testified to. And then furthermore about the truck, he goes, I am familiar with Matt's truck. I used to have the exact same truck. And I know the front end is almost all plastic. So I assumed if he had struck an individual that was walking on the road, there'd be debris on the roadway and there would be damage to the vehicle. I also observed that the victim in the roadway was barefoot, only wearing swim trunks, which was not common for someone to be walking on the highway. So at that point, our opinion was that the subject possibly would have been dumped at the scene, possibly fell out of the bed of a truck, or possibly fell off of a motorcycle. Now they're talking about the fact they were released from the scene. So they asked the sheriff, so the scene is secure, but the people reporting the body are not there, though. Is that strange that they're not there? And speaking about Herbstreit, the caller, the sheriff says, I definitely wish they would have been there. So they asked the sheriff, was it strange that Matt Herbstreit was that out of the norm that he would leave in an expedited way of within minutes of reporting this? So based on knowing him as a deputy for you, would it be out of the norm that he would just report something and then hightail it right out of there? The sheriff said, yeah, I mean, a situation like this is not common, but I would say the best case scenario would be for them to remain on scene. Now referring to his communication with Herbstreit that morning, the sheriff said, Matt called me to basically give me his version of what had taken place. And they asked him, can you tell us what those words were? The sheriff said he told me that they were driving north on 78 when they saw what they thought was a deer in the roadway. He said Matt told them that they swerved around the deer and for some reason they came back and realized it was not a deer. They asked the sheriff, did you have any feeling about that at the time when he told you that? The sheriff said it definitely seemed a little strange, but it's a weird spot in the roadway. It's very dark and it's hard to see. Now, what's happening next as we lead into the decision to contact ISP to take over? The sheriff said, well, as far as my next steps, we remained on scene. Again, this is what kind of conflicts with Mercado's weird testimony. The sheriff says, we had no evidence or anything to point us in the direction that the said victim had even been hit by a car. So we did not believe that was the case at the time. To even think about Matt and Amy being involved because they didn't even think a vehicle was involved at that time. At least everyone but Mercado. Okay, and you're still in your mind at 7 a.m., still unknowing of what took place? The sheriff goes, and as far as a weird feeling about Matt and Amy, again, there was no evidence for us to say that they were involved in an accident at this point. But he did say, obviously, I thought it was strange that they're reporting something at 3:40 in the morning. So then they asked the sheriff, when did you become aware that Matt Herbstreit, that it is better than a 50% chance that he's involved? And the sheriff says, well, basically what happened was after we made notification to family members, Detective Mercado, Chief Lambert, and myself met back at the scene to discuss everything we had learned throughout this process and to decide what our next steps were. And they agreed the next steps would be someone would need to interview Matt and Amy since they were first on the scene. Now, a member of the jury, a juror, asked the sheriff if you totally switched topics, if you had seen, he goes, if you've seen any of your employees pull into the parking lot in their personal vehicle without a front license plate, would you address that? Sheriff said it would be mentioned, yes. Now, Coroner Jones asked the sheriff, do you remember seeing a front license plate on Herbstreit's truck? And the sheriff says, so I never saw Matt's truck the night of this incident. I know when I've seen his vehicle at the sheriff's office, it had 2 license plates. But Herbstreit, when they inspected the truck that night, had 1. Witness number 5, we are almost there. We're closing in on 2 hours here. We're almost there. Now we're with Jackson's dad, who's at the stand, Joshua Sisler. This is where Jackson was living that night. And of course, they have to ask him these tough questions first. We are here at this inquest to determine the manner of death, accident, homicide, but that also includes a third option. And the coroner asked Josh, Jackson's dad, if he had been fearful of Jackson being in the situation that he might take his own life. Joshua responded with, no. Then they asked Jackson's dad, has there ever been any indication in his past history that would raise you any kind of concern in that area regarding taking his own life, Jackson taking his own life? And Josh said, not really. Now in regards to the alcohol and drinking alcohol at the cabin and coming back home and then being intoxicated and walking out of the house to walk barefoot back to the cabin, the lawsuit, the wrongful death lawsuit, accuses Josh of providing the alcohol, providing that venue. But Josh's testimony tells a different story. Josh says, I didn't know they were going to be out at the farm drinking that night. And furthermore, he goes, he was 18, so I didn't really ask too many questions anymore about where he's going, where he was, what he was up to that night. And so, I mean, and I guess that isn't the question I'm asking. This is the coroner now asking Josh. But was that a regular? Did he use THC often? Which is marijuana, a psychoactive ingredient in marijuana. Josh said, I'm not sure, but I would imagine. Then they asked Josh, and then alcohol, was that something he did use often or not? And Josh said, I don't know. If he did, he didn't tell me about it. Witness number 6, they asked similar questions to Jackson's mom here, Diana Kradle. We're not going to dive into that testimony because the mom, Jackson was not staying with his mom that night. He was staying with his dad. And obviously, Diana and Josh do not live together anymore. Then we get the verdict, right? And so the coroner instructed the jury before going into deliberation at the end of day 2. He says, you're going to choose between an accident and a homicide. And defining a homicide would be the driver here of the truck, which the testimony and evidence suggests it was Herbstreit because he has DNA, Jackson's DNA under the truck at least. Was there any form of recklessness with driving? It could be an accident, but it's probably just an accident. But recklessness in the sense of, was there negligence on the part of the driver, Matt Herbstreit? Whether he was distracted, whether he was speeding, was he intoxicated? Or could he just not see him? Was it just purely an accident? There's not enough lighting. Speed limit's like 45 out there, 45, 55. So you don't really need to be speeding. You don't need to be traveling well over the speed limit to be still traveling at a high speed. 55 still a high speed in regards to a pedestrian, right? It took them about a half hour, I believe. I don't know how long they were back there. It wasn't long. They come back and the verdict is a homicide. They said that the driver, Matt Herbstreit, allegedly the driver, that's the testimony and evidence suggested from those 2 days, that he acted reckless because he was drinking alcohol throughout the night, based on the evidence and testimony, and that there were no brake marks. So that's either speeding, not paying attention, whatnot, that he didn't hit the brakes. Because they said they went around the body and then came back around. So it's possible they didn't need brake marks. But why is the DNA and so long story short, it was ruled a homicide. And that the recklessness of the driver here, Matt Herbstreit, caused the death of Jackson Kradle. The secondary they're allowed to give a recommendation in regards to their case. So as a group, as a jury, they can pick an official recommendation. And they said, when there's like a conflict of interest here, was the conflict of interest with the county employees? Instead of taking it all the way down to a special prosecutor down by Springfield, just hand it to a neighboring county state's attorney so that we can keep it local and hopefully it doesn't take as long or go so long without hearing any information or whatnot. And so that's the verdict, and that's a verdict that is contradicted with the defense. The defense in the civil case and the defense in the criminal case. The defense mentioned suicide at the preliminary hearings, or the probable cause hearing to determine if there's enough evidence to even move forward with the case with charges at all. The attorney for Herb Street, stood up and said, I think he may have been suicidal. I think we should consider the fact that he was suicidal. And that how can we charge, a law enforcement officer here with reckless homicide? It doesn't make any sense. And without reckless homicide, there's no obstruction. So you really just need to dismiss all the charges. That's the defense's case. That was a Hail Mary, though, because it was the last thing he said before the judge made his ruling, and the judge scoffed at it. He didn't even really acknowledge it. He was like, state met their burden, probable cause. Let's schedule the next hearing. He moved on. He didn't even consider it. So I think maybe he was just throwing feelers out for what their defense could be. It'd be hard to imagine them using suicide as a defense. There's just nothing. I think there's some. I don't want to speak too much about it. Kids. Kids these days, high schoolers, they have anxiety, they have issues with, attention. And so it's not like Jackson lived a flawless high school career heading into the summer of 2024. When it comes to just needing help, just kind of needing help, staying focused, and but when it comes to the level of could this young adult take his own life because of something they're going through? There's just nothing. The testimony's not there. The evidence is not there. There could be something that we don't know. But right now it seems very unlikely, especially the way it was mentioned at the probable cause hearing. The judge scoffed at it and moved on. I don't think that's going to be something to go for. The reason why the case keeps getting continued, we're not going to be in court again until a month from now, is because the defense has picked up their own accident reconstructionist and their own medical experts to review the autopsy and then to kind of recreate the accident scene. And so they got kind of two big reports that they purchased. Now they're dissecting that, and then the prosecutors get to see what those reports say, and they can counter back and forth. Ideally, they should have those reports in by next month, and the prosecutor should have time to look it over and kind of see, compare and contrast what ISP and Dr. Peters' autopsy shows compared to what the defense picked up in their reports. So we should have time. So we should set a trial date. The February hearing, ideally, we should set it for trial. It's the date they set isn't going to be the date because they're going to file motions then. Then it's going to be about where is it going to be? Should it be in a different county? Should there be a different judge? Where should the microphones be? Where should the cameras be? Where should people breathe? Where should people take breaths? Where should people close their eyes, open their eyes? I'm being facetious, but, they're going to hash out every little detail of the trial. It may get moved. There's no indication right now that that's the case. But this case has already changed judges. They've already filed motions about where the microphones are at, where the cameras are at, whether there's even going to be media allowed. Media wasn't allowed at the inquest. It's reasonable. There needs to be media. We need the actual criminal trial to be on camera. If that's not the case, I think we'll make a lot of, I think I would cover that quite a bit. I'd provide a lot of coverage on the media not being allowed there. Right now, everything seems fine, so it's no big deal right now. But if that becomes an issue, changing venues might be an issue. Again, no indication of that yet. The main thing is getting their final reports in from the defense and the prosecutors reviewing what they have, compare and contrast with what they have. So most likely, ideally, that gets done before next month. next month's hearing, and they set a trial date, but then file a bunch of motions to hash out the details of the trial. So that'll get pushed off. They'll keep rescheduling it. Or they're going to file motion in limines, I think it's what's called, limonese, I don't know what it's called, but they're going to file a bunch of motions to try to dismiss the charges again. Or they're going to find holes in the investigation, holes in the evidence, exculpatory evidence, bringing it to the table. Find it hard to believe they're going to go necessarily the bad investigation route, because it seems the evidence is really strong. They have physical evidence, DNA, fabric, the autopsy, and then they have a lot of circumstantial evidence, but video at the car wash, at the bars, witness testimony. Witness testimony is the first to be on the chopping block to impeach, but they have every type of evidence that you can imagine, and it's all strong. And they plead the fifth in the civil case. They plead the fifth at the inquest. They did not plead the fifth when they had those 2 formal interviews with Illinois State Police. That is going to make any defense really tricky, because now you have them lying to police, allegedly. They're charged with obstruction of justice for lying to police. So that's going to be a hurdle for the defense to climb. Most likely what they're probably they're probably not going to go the suicide route. They're probably not going to go with the bad investigation route. They're probably going to go with this accident reconstructionist and this medical report. And if there's any inconsistency between ISP and Dr. Peters with what the defense hires and gathers, there's any inconsistencies, reasonable doubt. There's no really burden or standard at an inquest to determine accident or homicide. It's just kind of like, hey, present what you need. The jury makes a decision. We move on. Beyond reasonable doubt in a criminal trial. So it's actually going to be, even the civil case, it's easier. They could find Matt and Amy liable in the civil case, but could walk free criminally even. I'm not saying he's going to walk free criminally. I'm not saying that's where it's at. I'm just saying it's really difficult. You just need to plant reasonable doubt that, well, maybe it wasn't the driver's fault. It was too dark. He couldn't see Jackson, or they didn't know Jackson was a human. If he was just kind of slumped over or passed out, Herbstreet's driving a big truck. He may have just thought it was, with it being dark and maybe having a few too many drinks, but it's not illegal to drink alcohol. If you're over 21, you are allowed to drink alcohol. You're even allowed to drink alcohol and drive. There's a limit, a legal limit, but if you're 21 and older with a valid driver's license and citizen of the United States, Illinois particularly for this matter, you can drink a few beers, you can have a drink, and as long as you're under the legal limit, you can drive a vehicle. That's going to be the case here. And from what I've learned and gathered, no matter what Marth did, releasing from the scene, not releasing from the scene, just the fact they're pleading the fifth, invoking their constitutional rights, which we support here, they are not legally required to submit to a chemical test. They could refuse field sobriety. They could refuse the breathalyzer. And yeah, they take them to the jail, but they can refuse a blood draw. So no DUI. There's no proof they were intoxicated. There's testimony saying they were drinking, but there's no testimony. There's no evidence saying that they were above the legal limit. That's going to be the trial. Most likely, they could try to file these motions to a plea deal or dismiss the charges. Kind of seems like where this is headed is it's going to trial. And the defense is going to just going to try to flip the narrative, like the sheriff's office did in the lawsuit, saying that we're not saying necessarily that it's 100% their fault, but we should establish the percentage who's majority to blame for Jackson's death. And the sheriff's office, they're not saying that this is it. What they're saying is that the court should consider the fact that Jackson was heavily intoxicated and that he was in the household of his dad's, and his dad, I mean, this is what they say in the lawsuit, alleged that the dad let him leave the house in that state, intoxicated, to walk barefoot and shirtless. But we've already covered that's not reasonable. If you're looking at this with an unbiased lens, it's not reasonable for someone that's never walked to the cabin from their house in the middle of the night, mind you, barefoot with just swim trunks on. That was just not predictable. There's no testimony or evidence that suggests that Madeline or Josh would have any clue that that's what Jackson was planning to do. Jackson might not even have understood that himself in the moment. But they're going to use that against him. That you're right, he didn't know. But right now, where the case stands, the criminal complaint, the criminal charges, reckless homicide, reckless conduct, obstruction of justice, attempt to obstruct justice. The reckless homicide is his actions, Herb Street's actions led to the death of Jackson Kradle, being that at 3:30 in the morning, after drinking alcohol since the prior evening, all the way up to the incident, and not sleeping during that time, that the combination, and no brake marks, that the combination of that is that a struck and ran over Kradle, who was in the roadway. And the sheriff's office says that Jackson wasn't a pedestrian. And the sheriff's office, in the lawsuit, the lawyers, they have outside counsel, a law firms in Chicago, and so the defense for the sheriff's office is, that Jackson wasn't a pedestrian. So they're saying this is a vehicle pedestrian crash, that Herb Street ran into Jackson, who was a pedestrian on Illinois Route 78. The sheriff's office, legal defense is arguing that he was not a pedestrian. That you can't walk on Illinois Route 78 legally. It's not a crosswalk or anything. And also that he was, to a level of intoxication, he couldn't defend himself. Like in this sense, couldn't avoid an accident himself. So he was an obstruction. He was kind of the one causing the danger on the roadway, because he himself was unable to determine, if he was walking on the roadway, if he was on the side, and so he didn't have that reaction time, and so he was severely impaired. So they had the homicide verdict. The next a couple months later, in late March, Herb Street's file has those charges against him. The reckless conduct, homicide, it mentions, the alcohol, it mentions the speeding, and then obstruction of justice for that written statement to the sheriff. Prosecutors say that's a lie, that he went around the vehicle, came around, thought it was a deer, but realized it was a body, it was just a passerby. But also, the attempt to obstruct justice. That attempt to obstruct justice is going to the car wash, washing off evidence. And then the reason why it's an attempt and not obstruction of justice, because he did it, it's because, Jeff Thu, ISP CSI, inspected the truck that night and still came up with the DNA in the fabric. So even though he went to the car wash, it wasn't successful. He didn't remove all the evidence. And there's been several hearings. And then the wrongful death lawsuit, which I have coverage of that. I have that on the website. Scott Marth has been dropped from the lawsuit because when you file a lawsuit, a civil case, you have to find how you violated the Constitution. That's kind of the charge you bring someone in a civil case. They were charging Officer Marth, the first officer on scene, with depriving the victim of access to the courts. Because since he didn't do a thorough investigation or a proper investigation, a thorough investigation, that means evidence wasn't collected that would give the victim access to the courts. But they argued, well, we are in the middle of a wrongful death lawsuit, and there's also a criminal proceeding ongoing. There's a ongoing criminal case connected to this case, so it's clear and evident and obvious that they do have access to the courts. So thus, there is no charge to make. And so he got dropped, but it's without prejudice. So although Scott Marth is no longer being sued at this point, the parties agreed that if they do find a charge, that there is information that comes through and they are able to charge him with another violation of the Constitution, or a different violation of the Constitution, mind you, then he could be rebrought. He could still get brought into the Jackson Kradle lawsuit, wrongful death lawsuit, but right now he is not a defendant in the lawsuit. The city of Savannah, who has contracted the Savannah Ambulance Association, who employed Amy Hubble as a paramedic, city of Savannah has been dropped, because Savannah Ambulance is a nonprofit. Even though they're contracted, I have the contract on my website as well in that story, and those stories about Savannah Ambulance, Amy Hubble, and the lawsuit. Nonetheless, they're dropped, city of Savannah. But the Savannah Ambulance Association responded. I have that article for that of Savannah Ambulance's response. That was about a month or so ago. Where Savannah Ambulance doesn't blame the victim and the victim's father like the sheriff's office does, but they basically just say, hey, whatever Amy did that morning, regardless if it was negligent or not, has nothing to do with us. She was off duty. She wasn't asked to respond. She wasn't asked to go to that scene. Whatever she did there, she did on her own accord and has nothing to do with the Savannah Ambulance Association. Therefore, Savannah Ambulance is not liable for anything. So not saying that she's innocent or that Jackson's to blame, but to say that since she was off duty and was not instructed to be there or do anything there, that the Savannah Ambulance should be off the hook. And then Amy's response, as I said earlier, is to plead the fifth. All the other part, there's a bunch of bars. There's, the dispatcher, Becca Frederick, that are defendants in there. The sheriff, obviously. They've all filed to dismiss. From what I recall, they've all filed to dismiss. They haven't quite got there yet, but, they've all filed to dismiss. The only ones to respond, the sheriff's office, Scott Marth to say, hey, you guys don't actually have a charge against us because nothing Marth did deprived him of the courts. The sheriff's office responded, Savannah ambulance responded, Amy Hubble responded. Herbstreit got a stay, so his civil case is paused until after the criminal trial, if there is a criminal trial, or at least after the criminal case. I haven't looked into the bars, but the civil case, they got deadlines out for a couple of years. The civil case is going to get dragged on just because there's so many defendants, a lot of litigation. There's so much that has to be done, and then Matt Herbstreit himself has to go through an entire criminal proceeding before even getting to the civil proceeding. So there's a lot to go there, and there's still a lot more to go with the criminal case. We still haven't been told whether or not there's going to be criminal charges against anyone else. As far as we know, Officer Marth is still employed. Amy Hubble, it's an unknown. It's a big question mark officially if Amy Hubble is employed with the Savannah Ambulance Association or not. Rebecca Frederick got fired for that phone call telling her where the cops were at. And then, obviously, Herbstreit and Hubble were put on administrative leave. There was an internal investigation open, but they ultimately resigned 3 days after the incident instead of being interrogated by Mercado and crew with the internal county investigation and their ISP investigation. So right now, we're in a waiting mode again with the criminal proceeding and a civil case. Both are aiming towards jury trials. So we may get a jury trial in the criminal case against the driver, Matt Herbstreit, and we at least are demanding there's a jury trial demanded in the civil case. That could get, but we could also end up in a plea deal. And we could also end up in a settlement. So with that, KyleJBales.com/Jackson-Kradle. That is going to be where we have a one-stop shop with everything, all of my coverage independent. And that goes back to April. So I've covered independently all the way from Matt Herbstreit's first court appearance in April all the way through updates with the wrongful death lawsuit. And then the inquest transcripts. So we just went through the inquest. The entire transcripts are available for your own viewing and downloadable right here at KyleJBales/Jackson-Kradle. Shout out to the Mertz Law Firm, to the dispensary in Fulton, as well as the Jackson Kradle Memorial Foundation. There's a euchre tournament to play some cards on Saturday, February 7th to raise money for scholarships. You can find that information on the website as well. So with that, please give me feedback. Email me, news@KyleJBales.com. Message me. Please give me some real feedback on what you think I can do to make these better, to these more interesting. It's the visuals, more of me, less of me. Find a different thing, find a different way to show sponsors, just anything. And keep giving me tips as well, new information on things. I don't want to commit to anything right here, but I do have some other cases and stories in mind to do a long form presentation. I want to get to a point where I can do it every week. But remember, independent journalism does not have a corporate overlord. I do not have anyone paying the bills for me other than me. And so in order for me to live, buy court documents, money for FOIA requests that require it, gas money, better equipment, upgrade the website. There's a lot of different things I can do if those funds are provided. So please donate $5 a pop If every single one of my followers chipped in a couple bucks, I'd be set. I could take care of the rest, right? And if you have a business and would like to support, well, we can promote your business while we're at it. You know, 2 birds with a stone, you know, scratch my back, I scratch yours. So please consider that. KyleJBales.com/donate and KyleJBales.com/support. That's how you can help support this work so we can do more like this, and I can get out in the field more and talk to more people, get some more visuals, and we can work on more cases and more stories, and we can do more than just a little article. We can do a little bit more, but we need help from the ground up to support the independence of independent journalism, to not speak truth to power, but to make the powerful speak the truth. That's it for me. My name is Kyle Bales, and I'm an independent journalist based in Davenport, Iowa.